Hi everyone. So today we will be discussing the cranial nerves, right? So as we know, the peripheral nervous system consists of 12 pairs of nerves that come out of the brain. They are known as the cranial nerves, and there are 31 pairs of nerves that come out of the spinal cord. They are known as the spinal nerves. Now the cranial nerves there are 12 of them, and they are numbered in Roman numbers, right? And you have to remember the order in which they occur. For the purpose of NEET as well as boards, you will need to remember the origin, the destination and the function of each of these nerves. So, starting with nerve 1, which is the olfactory nerve. The olfactory nerve is a sensory nerve. So now again, as we know, nerves can be of 3 types. Nerves can be sensory if they are made up of sensory neurons. They can be motor if they are made up of motor neurons, or they can be mixed. So they carry both sensory as well as motor information. So now, sensory neurons, for example, the olfactory nerve, it originates from the olfactory epithelium, which is situated on the ethmoid bone, right? So as the name suggests, its function is to carry the sense of smell, and it carries it to the olfactory area of the temporal lobe, right? So that's number 1. The optic nerve, which is the second nerve, is also a sensory nerve. It originates from our retina, right? And it carries impulses of visual impulses, so sense of vision, to the optic chiasm. So what is the optic chiasm? The optic nerves from each of the eyes leave, right, and make a cross section which is known as the optic chiasm, this. So this optic chiasma is where the optic nerve supplies to, and then it goes into the midbrain as well, because the midbrain is responsible for controlling our startle reflexes, our auditory and visual reflexes. Moving on to the oculomotor nerve. As the name suggests, oculo comes from the word, from the sense of vision, and motor means movement, right? So it's a motor nerve whose main function is to help in the movement of the eyeball and the upper eyelid. So it helps in the up, down movement, right? Adduction movement, so towards the nose, the movement of eyeballs towards the nose, and outward movement as well, so protrusion, right? So making our eyelids bigger. It supplies to the eye muscle, and it originates from the ventral midbrain. Coming to the 4th nerve, which is the trochlear nerve. Now this is a very, very common question, that it is the thinnest and smallest nerve. It's a motor nerve, originates from the dorsal midbrain, and it has the superior oblique muscle of the eye. Okay, it supplies to the superior oblique muscle of the eye. So what does it do? It helps in the down and inward, so making your eyes smaller and looking down. These 2 movements of the eyeball are controlled by this nerve, trochlear. Okay, moving on to trigeminal. This is the largest, not the longest, but the largest, the thickest of all our cranial nerves. It's a mixed nerve. Now because it's a mixed nerve, it has 2 kinds of functions. It has a sensory function and a motor function. Now the trigeminal nerve breaks down into 3 branches, V1, V2 and V3. Okay, these 3 branches are the ophthalmic, maxillary and the mandibular branches. Okay, the ophthalmic branch applies to the lacrimal glands, to the eyelids, right, which helps in the sensations, 3 kinds of sensations: pain, temperature and pressure. Okay, maxillary supplies to the maxillar region, and mandibular supplies to the jaw region or the mandibular region. The mandibular branch is also known as the dentist's nerve. Okay, now out of all of these nerves, V3 has the most motor component. It controls 8 muscles that help us in chewing. So for example, the digastric, the masseters, there are 8 total muscles. The names, all of them you don't need. but 8 muscles which are controlled, the motor control of those 8 muscles are done by these nerves. So this nerve essentially helps us in chewing and swallowing. Okay. Moving on to the 6th cranial nerve. The 6th cranial nerve is the abducens nerve. The abducens nerve is again a motor nerve which originates in the pons, and it supplies to the lateral rectus muscle of the eye, which helps in the abduction, so movement of the eyeball away from the nose. That is what it helps in. So it moves it away from the nose. This is the movement of abduction, right? We'll do the next 6 cranial nerves right now, so hang on. So moving on to the next cranial nerves. Our cranial nerve of number 7 is known as the facial nerve. The facial nerve, as it suggests, supplies to the face, right? So the facial nerve is a mixed nerve, so it has both sensory and motor functions, which originates in the pons and supplies to the whole of the face. So what are its sensory functions? Its sensory functions are obviously associated with the tongue, so it helps in the taste, sensation of taste, gustatory reception. This is also known as gustatory reception. To the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So if this is the tongue, then the anterior 2/3 is supplied by this nerve. Other than that, it controls proprioception, which basically means sensation of touch, pain, pressure to the facial muscles, to the whole face region. For motor control, it controls all of our facial muscles to help us provide with the facial expressions that we usually generate under different situations, right? Moving on to nerve number 8, which is the vestibulocochlear nerve. Now, the cochlea, as we know, is present in the inner ear. It helps us to hear, and the vestibule is also part of the inner ear, which helps in body balance. So obviously, the main functions would be to help in equilibrium, that is balance of the body, which is done by the vestibular branch of this nerve, and obviously audition or hearing, which is done by the cochlear branch of this nerve. So it's a sensory nerve which originates in the pons, and it supplies to multiple regions, the cerebellum for posture, the thalamus for relaying information to the different parts of our cerebral hemispheres so that we can understand what is being said, pons and medulla, correct? Moving on to number 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve. It's a mixed nerve which originates in the medulla, and it supplies to the muscles of speech, swallowing and the parotid gland. So obviously it has 2 kinds of functions. The sensory functions are taste buds, which are on the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, so the back 1/3 of the tongue, and as well as chemoreceptors and baroreceptors, an extremely important function. Chemoreceptor means receptors which are able to sense the chemical composition of the blood, right? In this case, in the carotid bodies, the carotid are the 2 main arteries which carry blood to your brain. So for these arteries to be able to understand the oxygen and CO2 concentration or the acidity of the blood, helps the brain to understand how efficiently we are breathing or whether there is an asphyxiation going or not. It triggers the Hamburg reflex, which helps us to keep breathing. This reflex is the reason because of which we cannot forcefully or voluntarily stop breathing ever, right? So baroreceptors also measure, they are the pressure receptors, right? So these 2 receptors actually help your respiratory system to regulate its rate of breathing depending on the amount of available oxygen and on the amount of oxygenation of your hemoglobin. The motor section of this nerve has 2 parts, the brachial and the visceral components. The brachial and the visceral components, they help in the functions of speech, so the movement of speech, in the functions of swallowing. Okay, moving on to the 10th nerve, which is the vagus nerve. It's very important because it's the longest nerve and the only cranial nerve that crosses the thorax, that moves into the abdominal region. It has control over your digestive tract as well. It passes your throat, it goes below your thorax. It is a mixed nerve which supplies to the throat, lung as well as to the viscera, and its motor functions are extremely important because its motor functions have a parasympathetic sympathetic innervation, because of which it can control heartbeat, it can control digestive tract contractions based on the parasympathetic or sympathetic state of the body. Similarly, for sensory functions, it has functions in taste as well as proprioception. Have you ever noticed that under stress we fail to acquire the original taste of food? Often we lose appetite. A vagus nerve has a role to play in that. Okay, moving on to the 11th nerve, the spinal accessory nerve. Its origin lies in the spinal cord as well as the medulla. It's a motor nerve which supplies to two main muscles, the trapezius muscle and another large muscle that we have in the neck region, and it helps in the movement of our head. So the movement of the head, because of the movement of your neck and shoulder muscles, that is done by the spinal accessory nerves. Lastly, hypoglossal. It is a motor nerve which supplies to the tongue muscles, the intrinsic tongue muscles actually. So what do I mean by intrinsic tongue muscles? The internal muscles of the tongue which upon moving help us in speech as well as swallowing, right? So the two main functions include speech and swallowing. These are your 12 cranial nerves. You get direct questions like what is the function of this nerve, and they often give you the Roman numbers instead of giving you the names. They can also ask for obviously the origin, the destination. They can ask based on eye movement, they can ask you which kind of nerve, which nerve causes this kind of movement. They'll tell you a specific movement like abduction or adduction, and you'll have to say which particular nerve does that movement, because there are, in the case of eyeball movement, there are obviously multiple nerves which has a role to play. Similarly, the longest, the largest, the smallest, thinnest, all of these questions are also very, very probable in NEET as well as in boards. For boards, however, you do not need the origin and destination because I've never usually seen questions in such depth. But I hope this much was clear. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.